WOVU 95.9 FM, Our Voices United. Trey Modlin here, news director, bringing you a conversation with one of our newest show hosts here on the airwaves. Smoke and Mirrors debuted on Christmas 2024 with a series of episodes on Wednesdays at 8 a.m. It examines the Community Police Commission and how it functions while looking into various ways to improve it. We'll dive more into the show, but we also want to get to know the host. We have in studio Kayla Pincus, Cleveland native and co-author of the Cleveland Division of Police's new corrective action and discipline policy. Kayla, thank you so much for being here. And before we get into how you started this series, got to tell the audience, we are both Shaker Heights grads, same class, 2011. It's cool getting connected with you again.
Absolutely.
Now, but you graduated early. How'd that happen?
Yeah, that's right. I graduated half a year early. Lots of credits added up, I guess. And yeah, we were 17.
Yes.
I went to Southern Africa. I was living there for a while. I worked with kids from a township, and I was a cheetah wrangler on a wildlife sanctuary in South Africa, and then I was living in the Middle East.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're really well traveled. Now, was that for college, for work?
That was just for life, I guess.
Okay.
That was sort of an in-between thing between being a kid, I guess, and being an adult, although it was really adulty even then at the time. Lots of growing up fast during that trip.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting at one point. I was teaching English at a school with Jews and Arabs in Jerusalem, and I was working with high schoolers and middle schoolers, and I should have still been in high school at the time, so that was sort of a funny in-between experience. So it was just for life purposes, I guess.
Was that all on one trip?
Yeah, it
Wow.
was. I was in various countries in Southern Africa, and then I was in Israel, Palestine, and Egypt. I was actually in Cairo during the beginning of the revolution there in 2011.
Yeah, it must have been...
And then back home, and then college.
Absolutely. So what was your favorite site?
Cairo. It's not the most beautiful, but there's something so vibrant about the experience of being in Cairo. That is actually my favorite place in the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had some family members who have always wanted to go over there. The planning seems ridiculous.
It's a lot. It's a headache to travel and to do so carefully. Actually, when I was there in 2011, that was really before smartphones in a major way. I had like this tiny little red thing.
Well, not like phones today.
Yeah, no
continue.
GPS, right, and no messaging or anything like that. So it was very much like my experience of traveling was how people used to travel before we had technology that kind of guided us, which I feel like is a little bit of a claim to fame for me, that I get to have that experience. But it's dangerous too. So, it's important to keep that in mind that, traveling is not just glamour and glitz necessarily. But yeah, that was during a time before Instagram.
Right. I was about to say before Instagram, before everybody had to get the poses, people lined up, some of the overpopulated tourist spots.
Right.
Especially in the summer or fall, whenever the peak travel conditions are.
Yeah.
Depending on the weather.
I was actually, when I was finishing my graduate program, I was in Europe, and this was during COVID. It's kind of a long story. We could talk about another day. But I ended up in Greece, and on an island, on a deserted island in Greece, which was Santorini, which is one of the most famous places in the world. And it's usually completely covered with humans, but there were no humans there. So it was just me. And I was reading, actually, at the time, a book about Instagram and kind of how you can live in the moment versus trying to capture things for other people. And it was really a fascinating experience, actually, to be there in that way.
Very well-traveled, Kayla Pincus. So quite the experience to share. Now, did your travel inspire you in any way to get into the line of work that you're in? How did you come about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, at the time, I was sure that I was going to be an ambassador to the Middle East. I was very passionate about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I'm Jewish, and anyway, this was just a big part of my life. Interestingly, traveling abroad made me realize how much I needed to stay here in America and work on our own backyard. It's not to say that that wouldn't have been a great career and that there shouldn't be people doing that. There should absolutely be people working on those issues, Americans working on those issues, etc. But yeah, it gave me an incredible appreciation for our country. But also, what I talk about is patriotism, which is the responsibility that we have to make it a better country, which I find to be kind of the highest calling of a patriot, is to work on your own home. Interestingly, it sort of led me to realize more comfortably that I need to stay here.
I understand seeing all these experiences helped kind of shape you into this line of work. So how did you come up with the show name Smoke and Mirrors?
So just the other day, I was at City Hall and I gave a public comment. After a 4.5 hour long meeting, I gave, you're limited to a 3-minute time slot for public comment if they decide to give it to you, which actually they can just decide they don't want to do public comment. In that comment, I talked about Smoke and Mirrors very briefly regarding the nominations process, or I referenced the phrase Smoke and Mirrors, right. Not in relation to my show. That is a very, and frankly, Trey, I was sitting, right in here when I was kind of workshopping what the title of this should be.
Yes.
And I was looking through, I wrote these out, right? I wrote these scripts out for the episodes, and I'm looking through and I'm thinking, what did I talk about in this episode, this first episode, and what, really is going to, I feel like, resonate for this issue more broadly as we move forward in future episodes that really captures the situation. And it ended up being the phrase Smoke and Mirrors. In working with policing in Cleveland and where we currently stand with policing in Cleveland, I have regularly referred to what I call veils over our eyes. And that, you'll be going through this whole area of work, doing whatever it is you're doing. And you'll find yourself kind of vaguely understanding things. It doesn't feel right. There's something doesn't sit right with you, with me anyway, and I can see others experiencing the same thing. Then the next step is you realize there's something over my eyes. And it takes a long time to realize there's something over my eyes. And then, from there you realize, okay, there's a veil here. There's something I'm not seeing that I can be seeing. And then figuring out how to dismantle that veil, educate yourself, get a clear sense, sort of, I call it triangulating, getting information from different sources so that you can understand what is it that's in front of you and why can't I see right? Why can't I see clearly? And then working your way to see more clearly and then figure out what to do from there. I think that the idea with the Smoke and Mirrors is you never really fully understand what you're looking at. And that is in many ways, by design. Whether it's done intentionally by certain people or not, or nefariously, is a question I've actually never really been particularly interested in. It's more just that they're there. The smoke and mirrors are there. The veils are there. And figuring out what you're going to do with that information. Like, that's what's important, more so than, who's doing what to who at what time. Not to say that that's never important, but or who's got bad intentions or whatever the case may be. It's more useful to just look at what's in front of you, which is that maybe there's smoke and mirrors there, and figure out how to dismantle that.
Talking with Kayla Pincus, Cleveland native and co-author of the Cleveland Division of Police's new Correction, Action, and Discipline Policy. Now, specifically with the Community Police Commission, since this is a complex issue and there are a lot of moving factors, what are some things that you'd like to see change there when it comes to their processes?
Sure. I would like to see the CPC strengthened. Then I think it becomes a question of what does that mean? I always refer to the container of the CPC, and we need to fortify it, with all of the powers that is given to this thing, through the consent decree and Charter Section 115.5, the Charter Amendment under Issue 24. And there are a bunch of holes in the container of the commission, and we need to figure out how to proactively block those up before we keep throwing more things inside of it. We want to achieve so much, but the way that we're going to be able to do that is by fortifying the structure. So to me, I would start with the Rules Committee, right? The commission is kind of an umbrella, and within that you have different committees. It's like the least glamorous, but the Rules Committee is where things need to really begin to make sure that the structure is there. Again, I know that's not a glamorous answer, but that's how we can start to build a foundation, or we can continue to build a foundation that will set us up for more success. One of the things that I have personally really had a hard time with, or I've disagreed with, is I think that people get very carried away with what do we look like? Are we looking good? Are people pleased with us? And public opinion is crucially important. But in my view, the public hasn't even been made aware of the commission. So who is it? What audience are we concerned with when we say that we want to make sure that we're looking good and sounding good? It's more important, instead of reacting to whatever's placed in front of us at a given time, it's more important that we are proactive with the steps that we take to create that container, and then we can put things in it as we want to, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody sets our agenda except the people of Cleveland. We do that by being proactive, not reactive to things that are thrown at us. And so figuring out how to, and this is not my phrase, this is actually Richard Jackson's phrase, is he gave in a public comment, in 2023 about building capacity, the importance of building capacity. And I couldn't agree more. We need to figure out what our capacity is and how to then build out that framework so that we can fit more into our container.
You've also said that you're a supporter of the Community Police Commission. Is that part of it as well? You see potential?
Yes, I see potential in the Community Police Commission to such an extent that I have dedicated years of this pro bono, for free, in ways that I think that, sometimes people don't understand just what an opportunity this is. I feel very passionately about that. To say that I see potential in it is really an understatement. I see potential in it. And I think that there are people who know about that potential who don't want it to be there. They understand the potential in it. I think that this is really about making sure that we build the community's understanding of just what kind of potential we really could have here. And that community ranges from the civilians of Cleveland to the police. And that's, I think, also is kind of a wildly misunderstood issue, is that this Community Police Commission, if done methodically in a non-toxic way, which is to say have those rules and have that container built out, that this would be an absolute service to the civilians of Cleveland and the police of Cleveland. Those are often bifurcated or looked at as separate and divided, and they're not. In my opinion, they're not.
Kayla, you co-authored the corrective action policy. Can you tell us more about how that serves the civilians and the police?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually a perfect example of how the Community Police Commission can serve both of those groups. So this is, I think that this hasn't gotten enough attention, but this is a total overhaul of the police discipline and corrective action setup. And what it does, it's a complex thing, and I talk about that kind of the second half of episode 2. But in effect, what we've done is, and I co-authored this with Richard Jackson of the Black Shield. He and I worked together, he as a former police sergeant of Cleveland and me as a civilian, and also with definitely significant input from others, as well as ultimately the Cleveland Division of Police. What we did was we really tried to take out discretion from the policy. Mm-hmm. So what that does is that there used to be corrective action guidance that kind of was this amorphous thing that, you don't really, you're a civilian, you receive mistreatment from the police and you don't really know what's going to happen to that officer. Mm-hmm. Or you're a police officer and you go to work and you wonder what's going to happen to you. Are you going to make some error that you don't even really know exists, and then you're going to be disciplined, and is it going to last forever, or what is even going to happen? And what this does is, for both sides, it takes out that unknown and it brings it into a space of, for the most part, mm-hmm. right? For the most part, especially the lower level offenses, the lower level violations. If you do this, you get this. Mm-hmm. If you do this, you get this. If they do this, they'll get this, right? Meaning, if you're a civilian and an officer does something, you'll know what kind of corrective action they will receive, which includes both non-disciplinary action and disciplinary action. There's a lot more to it, but really what this does is it takes a lot of the discretion, frankly, from the public safety director and from the chief of police, and it creates an equal system for everyone. So you don't have to then worry in the same way about whether, something is an issue of retaliation and maybe you're going to receive way more discipline than somebody else, or whatever the case may be. There are all number of kind of different elements of this, but it serves both the police officers, the rank and file, and the civilians as well, to just be very clear on where that corrective action goes. And that's something that would, and I've spoken with officers who are thrilled with this policy, and they believe that had the Community Police Commission not been in existence to pass this policy, we wouldn't have this in 10 years. We wouldn't have this past 10 years. We may never get this because the people in the positions of power would never want to give up their discretion. They would want to have complete leeway at all times, but that's not what we want. And so that's where the CPC can come into play, is we all collectively work together, we check each other, we listen to each other, and we bring our own perspectives to the table. And then we can create policies that maybe are not the most popular for the people in the highest ranking positions, but they are what the people of Cleveland want, and that means both the civilians and the police officers.
You have seen this can be a very racially polarizing line of work at times. How have you navigated that throughout your career?
Yeah, it's definitely very racially polarizing in a lot of ways. It's important to keep in mind that it doesn't need to be. While I have this platform right now, I don't think that I should be the only person with a platform speaking about this. And in fact, I really strongly advocate for other people to speak about this. It should not be exclusive to certain people. So I just want to make that clear, that I have the opportunity to have a microphone here, to have a platform, but there's a lot of space for people, and I hope that we can build that out for more people to talk about this issue. And in terms of, generally speaking, the racially polarizing component of all of this, and more generally the polarizing issue here, I am a white person, and this is an issue, policing and the criminal justice system, that it disproportionately impacts Black people and people of color. It is important that we do not shy away from it, no matter who you are. I feel that way very strongly. I talk about this a lot in episode 2, but I am unabashedly who I am. And I think that it is important that we never shy away from who we are. And I think actually when we do that is in many ways where we end up going wrong. We try to be something we're not. We try to pretend that we're something we're not. Instead of just sitting in the fact that we are all citizens of this country, of this city, and we should all be civically engaged. It is our duty to be civically engaged. Again, I think that oftentimes there's a sense that only certain people are allowed to have a voice in this, and I couldn't advocate more strongly against that concept. I think that in general there's this idea, these divides between white and Black, or pro-police and anti-police. These are false dichotomies that I think all of us are tired of. We are all tired of living in these boxes that never quite feel right to us, that separate us from each other in ways that are very uncomfortable. I think that in general, in Cleveland, and across the country, frankly, but in Cleveland, we're tired of living in that space. It doesn't need to be that way. You don't need to be ashamed to be Black. You don't need to be ashamed to be white. You don't need to be ashamed to be pro-police. You don't need to be ashamed to feel like you want the police to represent you better and protect you better. Those are not things that are mutually exclusive. I mean, so I think that really the work here, in many ways, and what I've hoped with Smoke and Mirrors can be, is educational and bringing us all to the table, because that's really what the Community Police Commission is about, is all of us having a voice at this table.
People have all sorts of opinions, and how do you handle personal attacks, especially undeserved, in these tense and sensitive atmosphere? How does that shape you and your work?
Yeah, I've experienced quite a few of them. I don't think it's fair, and I think that it is important, when you're receiving kind of unfair attacks, to not get numbed out to it, right? Like, I think part of people who exist in this space, we get hardened. And we get hardened to any number of things. And it's important to actually, I think, maintain your sensitivity because people feel different ways about that. But I think that we really are actually, I think in many ways, we're trying to create a space here where it's for people who have varying degrees of sensitivity. Right. We don't want to just have insensitive people around this. So I think that, yes, these personal attacks, they impact me. However, one thing I actually spoke about when the discipline policy or the corrective action policy was being passed, was that at the end of October or the beginning, I think it was the beginning of November, is I gave a public comment at that meeting where I was saying, okay, we've got a lot on our agenda today. We really have to get through this. And there are going to be people who are trying to distract us. And we have to stay in our bodies. I was sort of like walking the commission through like a meditation of like how to just breathe, and make sure that you breathe and you just stay focused. And as I was doing that, I began to receive personal attacks, very, very slanderous personal attacks. Unfortunately, it did actually cause the meeting had to be paused and recessed, and we had to go through the process of recessing the meeting. But which I mean, in many ways, I think was actually the right move. But in that moment, I was able to do what it was I was saying, which is just breathe through it and remember what the focus is, and remember what your where your compass is pointing. That I often talk about this compass thing. Make sure always that you're tuning your compass. And I personally spend a lot of time on that, so that when when I'm kind of in these more tense moments, it's kind of second nature, right? It's just natural for me to stay focused on the goal. It's a muscle that you build up of just knowing who you are, and practicing that every day, so that when, again, kind of the rubber meets the road in some of these most tense moments, that you're able to be who you are, stay who you are, stay in your body, stay in that experience. So I guess the answer to your question is I breathe.
So I'm going to ask you something you weren't sure if you wanted me to ask before we started, but I'm going to ask anyway now.
Okay.
What do you like to do when you are outside of your work, not part of meetings, not meeting with people? And I imagine like you've talked a lot about meditation. Do you enjoy meditation as well in general?
I aspire to meditate more. Thanks, Trey. It's a goal. Okay, I'm not at where I want to be, but no, the truth is I spend an enormous amount of time on this, right? I actually spend like an enormous amount of my personal time, my professional time, all the time. I'm sort of I am really thinking about this issue, but when I'm not, I enjoy cooking. I'm a deep person, right? Yeah. So even if I'm not talking about this issue, I'm usually having conversations with friends about whatever it is that we're working on. This is a very tense time in the world, and it's actually been quite an interesting experience, especially this last couple weeks even. Everything is changing on the national stage. Right. Things are quite dramatic. And I'm very focused on these issues locally because they just feel so pressing to me. So generally speaking, I'm a huge podcast listener. I listen to podcasts. I always have a sort of podcast going. I actually break down sort of my own personal education into like 3 sections. So like one is long term, which is books. The other is sort of medium term, which is podcasts that have a certain theme that they build off of. And then there's more of my like week-to-week podcasts. So I have somewhat of an educational, like ongoing educational regimen for myself. I don't know if that sounds fun to other people.
People enjoy books. People enjoy loving podcasts. And it's kind of, similar to doing a show here, you're just talking.
Yeah. That's another thing. I've been, over the course of the last like year and a half, I read my favorite book in the world, which is called Humankind, A Hopeful History. I actually read it on Instagram Live. And what I'll do is I'll periodically pause and I'll talk with people who are watching about whatever it is that I'm reading, and we'll kind of talk about it together. I will say that all this work I came to out of purely my personal desire to be a part of our community. Yeah. So the way that I originally got involved with this was that I saw an advertisement for the Consent Decree Monitor Selection Forum on Instagram, and I put it in my calendar. I had no idea what it was. This was in February of 2023. Okay. And then I just went, and then I just kept going, and I just was like, this is fascinating. There's something really weird going on here that I would like to understand better. And so it just kind of snowballed from there. Somehow or other, my answer to your question of what I do for fun is still this, but it's variations. I guess it's variations on this.
And libraries are still a thing. So
libraries are very much still a thing.
Speaking of books and research, how do you do your research for your work?
So I'd mentioned earlier that I try to triangulate. There is somehow an enormous amount of information and at times a vacuum of information. Unless somebody could say otherwise. Smoke and Mirrors is the most concerted and focused educational platform regarding policing in Cleveland that has been done, certainly pertaining to the Community Police Commission, but in general. You've got lots of different documents, okay? You have the federal law, which is kind of bifurcated into traditional law, and also the consent decree that we have here in Cleveland. And so that's a document to get information from in and of itself. You've got the Ohio Revised Code, which is the laws of Ohio, and that is a very helpful tool to use. The city charter is extremely important. These are the documents to reference for everything. Then when you're dealing with policing itself, just specifically, you have the manual of rules for the police. You have the general police orders, which are often referred to as GPOs. There is the work that the federal monitor of the consent decree, which, in effect is the sort of hand of the judge. They're the entity that monitors the consent decree for the federal judge. They put out these semi-annual reports that are very informative. They track the progress of the consent decree. The consent decree itself is split up into lots of different sections. And so understanding that document, familiarizing yourself with that is very important. And then beyond that, I talk to people. I talk to officers. I talk to former officers. I talk to residents, the people kind of in my world, and I try to find people outside of my echo chamber of things. The CPC itself has put out some pretty incredible work. So there was a project that was done called the 100 Years Project that looked back at Cleveland policing over these last 100 years. It's very extensive. It has some gaps, but it's an incredible resource in and of itself. You've got the commission itself, you've got the meetings that are going on, and inside of the commission, you have the commission's rules. You have the charter amendment itself that governs the thing. And then you've got paragraph 16 of the consent decree is what specifically pertains to the Community Police Commission. You have city council that meets. There are a lot of different places that you can go for information, but there is a vacuum of knowing how to direct people, right? Which is in many ways what I think the value of smoke and mirrors is. I mean, who has the time to read any number of the things I just said? Like, that's ridiculous.
Hundreds of pages.
I mean, thousands and thousands of pages. Nobody has the space to do that. I don't at times understand how I have the space to do that.
Right.
I think that the more voices, the better. I don't want to be monopolizing a microphone. I don't want to be. I shouldn't be. And we should be, getting more input on this. I will say that one of the things that's extremely important to me regarding the CPC, you had asked earlier about things that I think should be improved or better. There should be an intake of information from the community, and there should be an outputting of information to the community. And this is something that I began designing with a community outreach program for the CPC in 2023, which, again, the idea was like, how are we receiving information on an ongoing basis, right? Whether that's surveys, focus groups, the work groups that exist for each committee inside of the commission, whatever the case is, and we could get creative with it. We don't have to just stick with those. We could expand. But then also, how are we putting information out? I think in an ideal world, smoke and mirrors maybe exists on its own, but it could also be the public relations tool of the Community Police Commission. I do think that while there is an enormous amount of information, there is a real gap and a need for focused information that really helps people who don't have just an unlimited amount of time and resources to read all that stuff, to be able to understand what's going on and know how they can engage and actually be able to sort of maximize their time, because people just don't have that much. Time is a huge commodity.
For sure.
So yeah, people need to be able to be informed and to know how to use their own experiences to drive policy and to drive changes. That's very important to me.
A lot of bases covered there for sure. Where can people find you?
They could find me at Lil Struggles. That's Lil Struggles with a Z on Instagram. You can also email me at kpincus@convergentstrategies.org. That is KPINCUS at convergentstrategies.org. That is my LLC. In general, I do work on understanding how the lines are narrated between us, the concept of us, quote unquote, and them, quote unquote, how to find more constructive ways to tell those stories of who we are. And I do that work as a sentencing expert. So I work on mitigation cases, parole cases, things of that nature. And I also work in the policy realm on not just criminal justice issues, but in general, messaging strategy. So that's what I do with Convergent Strategies itself, my LLC. You can email me there. You can find me on Instagram. And you can also find me on 95.9 WOVU.
Absolutely. Kayla Pincus, thank you so much for being here today. We really enjoyed hearing this, and the audience definitely has a lot to take home with. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Trey.